Welcome. In this video, we're going to assemble the Ferris Sweep. The Sweep is a variant of the Ferris open source keyboard. This too is open source, and it's based on the Ferris, but allows us to use a standard Pro microcontroller. And most components are going to be installed on the back side. This is the top side when you get it. We'll go ahead and flip this over. And what we're going to start with is the power switch. So the sweep allows you to have both wireless and wired connectivity. So you can use QMK if you're wired, connected via USB, or you can use ZMK with the wireless option. I've already got one switch installed over here. So let's go ahead and install our other switch. To do this, it's fairly simple. I recommend before you get started though, make sure you have all of your pieces and parts. I've got a little pin needed if I need some flux. I've got flux core solder, my soldering iron, everything's together here, easily grabbable. That way it makes it easier to assemble this. But the way I start is I'll put a little bit of solder on one pad, just enough to get started. And then we'll take our switch, and what we'll do is we just heat this one pad up, and this switch just sinks right in. We'll want it nice and straight. And now it's held on that one pin. That makes it easier to go ahead and solder down the rest of the pins. You may need to turn it and spin it the way I am to get to it, however your workspace is. So you notice how my solder is just kind of bubbling up here. If your solder does this, that means there's not enough flux for it to go on this little pad. So what I suggest, this is why you want to have a little bit of flux. Go ahead and mark those pads with some flux. Now the solder will flow better. Once you have your switch in position, it's real easy to move. It's soldered in solid. Now let's move on to our next part that we're going to solder in to place. And that is our hot swap switches. You'll notice each side, on our back side here, we've got these white areas with the gold contacts. Each of these is where we're going to solder in one of these sockets. Now these sockets are fairly simple to install. Doesn't matter which way you go, you just solder them into place and pop them in. To do this, I like doing the same method that we just did with the switches. That is, put a little bit of solder on one pad and then put your hot swap sockets in. So let's get started on that. What I do is I like to go through, put solder on one pad, and then we'll solder in all the sockets. So it doesn't take much. I made these with nice big pads, so if you got them from me, it should be pretty easy. Keep in mind, these keyboards, if you want this kit, you can get them from turkeyboards.com, and a variety of switch types. That way you can customize it however way you want. Okay, now that we have all of our pads with a little bit of solder, we grab our sockets and we place them in position. Then all you gotta do is heat that one pad up and it sinks right in. And there you go. All right, we'll go ahead and start getting the rest of these put in, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, now that we have all of our sockets soldered in place, all we need to do now is solder the other side of each one. Now, normally what I do is I'll turn my board so I can get to it easier. So all you need to do is put a little bit of solder on the other connector so it's soldered into place. And that's it. So I'll go ahead and get the rest of these soldered and we'll check back in. Now that we got all these sockets in, what I like to do is I'll check each of these pads, make sure we got good connections on both sides. And if I see any that are off, I'll touch them with the soldering iron just to make sure that we got good connectivity everywhere. And usually that just consists of just getting it in there, heating it up for just a second, pulling it back out. So it's pretty easy. Once you confirm you got good connectivity on all connections, we can flip our board over because we're done soldering the bottom side components. And now we'll solder the top end. For these, we've got a couple surface components. We've got our reset switch, our TRS connection, and then our microcontroller. We'll start with our reset switch, and then we'll do these other two. Just like we did before, I always start off by soldering one pad. Put a little flux on these pads just to make sure we get good connectivity. We'll solder the one pad. Do that on each side. And this is where these tweezers come in real handy. These things are tiny. And just hold it into place where we want it. There we go. And once we solder the one, we just touch some solder on the other pads. Once you do one side, we'll go ahead and do the other. All right, now that we have our reset switches in place, we'll do our TRS connections, which are these components. They simply just slide into their slot. And at the same time, I usually do the microcontroller connections too, because these are a tight fit. So I'll grab our microcontroller sockets. Now you could opt to just solder the microcontroller in. I recommend the sockets. If you get this in our Etsy store or eBay store, they'll always come with sockets. But if you go to turkeyboards.com, you can choose the way you want it connected. But once we have those in, it's a matter of just flipping them and solder them into place. So I'll hold. You've got a couple options. You can get some tape to hold these. Usually I just kind of hold them and just kind of gently place them down. And I've had good success with that. Now that they're all in, just like before, what we do, we solder one connection. What? That's my kitty cat, Simon. Keep paws in. This is the hot stuff. All right. Once that's done, we'll do like we did before. Just solder a single pin. Doesn't matter which pin you solder, just solder a single pin on each connection. And I do both sides. Now, if you taped them in place, unlike what I'm doing, then you don't have to necessarily do that. But what this allows us to do is we have the one pin soldered, and that allows us to just heat that pad up and make sure that the component is nice and flush with the board and we have no issues. I just kind of hold it in with my thumb, that way we have it nice and flush. Do the same thing on the other side. Be careful if you're doing it this way. You do not want to touch that to your skin. It will hurt. Now that we got those done, well, let's just solder the rest of the connections. All right, we have all of our connections done. So with this now all soldered in, you'll notice where I placed these, I left the battery terminals open, the plus and the minus. So if you got this wirelessly, you'll want to install your battery terminals with the red going to plus, black going to minus. That's wired through your switch, your on-off switch, and that will power your board. If you got this wired, it will not come with the battery. It'll still come with the switch. That way you can upgrade this later, because that's pretty easy to do if you ever wanted to. And what we'll do next, we're going to skip the battery installation because I'm doing a wired connection here. And we'll go ahead and start with the microcontroller. This is fairly easy. Now our microcontrollers are the C-Picro controllers. And those are based off the Raspberry Pi RP2040 microcontroller. These come with your keyboard if you got the wired. Otherwise, they'll come with a Bluetooth low energy microcontroller. And these you'll just simply want to put on your sockets. Now to do that, we grab our headers. The easiest way of doing this is I take the headers, I go ahead and install those. And for this particular board, I'm not going to go through the whole process here. I just want to show you, and that way you know how to finish it up. Now for ours, if it says top side microprocessor top down here, then you'll want to mount it thusly. Again, leaving those top two connections empty. I want to make sure you can see this. So our top two connections are empty on that. We don't want those soldered. It's just the other 12 that we're going to do. That way the back is flush with your headers. And then we just solder these in. Now for this particular model though, you don't have, and this is for us, most of them will do top side down. So you'll do it upside down. But for this one, we don't have that marked that way. So we actually want to do it the opposite way. We want it top side up. So what you're going to want to do with this is you'll want to solder it this way. Again, leaving the topmost connections empty. From this pin all the way to the back corner, these have actual pins in them. And this is flush to the headers in the back. We'll solder those in. And then once that's done, you just install your switches and your keycaps. To do that, it's fairly easy. To install your switches, you'll just want to put your switch in like this. It just presses right in. And that's done. Press your keycap on top. Now, you will want to separate these before you get too far. What I personally do, you can just take it, pop it apart, and then I take a small piece, small pliers, just pop that little board off, that separator board. And then you'll notice from these mouse bites, they've got just a little bit of excess board. I'll take a small file and I file these down so they're nice and smooth. Fits in the tray better for the keyboard case. We'll do both sides. There we go. We have a pretty much completed keyboard. Again, we just put it in our tray, screw it into place, put on our keycaps and keys, and we're ready to go. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and you can pick your sweep up at turkeyboards.com, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks again.